Let's take a look at the two of the hardest to draw elements, circles and ellipses. Even in 2D, circles are pretty difficult, and ellipses in perspective or shortening are actually really tough. I'm quite honest about it. So that also, however, means that when you start sketching ellipses and they simply don't match, that's not a big deal. That's actually normal. They just really require a lot of practice. But there's actually a lot to the geometry and how to construct circles and ellipses that can be very helpful in guiding you how to approximate their shapes correctly. Because again, in sketching, it's not about manufacturing precision, it's more about somewhat believable storytelling. So let's take a look at a circle. When we create a perfect square and create a nice grid inside with diagonals, verticals, and horizontals. And let's adjust those for a second. We can actually create a circle right inside. And if everything is done correctly, your corner points of your circle will touch the midpoints of each edge. And each quarter arc will cut a diagonal at roughly a 1/3 position. So this can actually be really very helpful. So let me scale this one down and then move it to somewhere else. And I had something presented here already. Now this is a proportional square, and I would like to construct my circle into. Now I know midpoint, midpoint, I have my midpoint here, midpoint there. And vertical midpoints, I have them here. So you see again, I made help through creating diagonals, and then where those diagonals cut, I can construct the midline and the vertical line. The 1/3 position might be a little bit more tricky now, but there is actually a nifty approach. It does not work really well, but I can give you a good idea. So you see up here we actually have one square. Here, this way now you see it better. Now this line is at 50-50. So 1/3 probably will be somewhere there. I just judge it and hope actually that I'm close. So, and through like the mirroring approach I showed you, I know when this cuts a diagonal, I can draw a vertical down, and here I can draw a vertical down till it hits the diagonal, and there I have, for example, another square. Now this square, if I hope everything was correct, have or should have each corner at a 1/3 position. So instead of working with 4 points, now I have 8 points in perspective, which I can make use of constructing my ellipse. Okay, so let's dump in a circle. And actually in Illustrator there are some perspective tools, but they're not really very powerful, to be honest. So I have to do a lot of trickery here right now. So this is a corner point, and a corner point, okay, and then those handles have to rotate and rotate. And now I have to make sure that, for example, those lines or those arcs actually cut through those corner points. And if I did everything correctly, I should maybe end up with a somewhat okay looking ellipse. I have the feeling this one is a little bit egg-like. Ah, well. There are more precise ways how to do it, but actually that requires a lot more time in Illustrator. Actually, that's one of the areas where it might actually be faster to just draw it by hand. And there is another element to ellipses. So you saw that I created this line. That's actually my minor axis. So what does minor axis mean? And minor axis has a partner, the major axis. For a second, let's draw just a really two-dimensional ellipse. And in here we can create a plus. This is the major, and this is the minor axis. You see, minor is shorter, major is bigger. But actually what this means is this. So while the major axis is the longer line, the minor axis is actually describing kind of like the z-axis of the cylinder. And you see this kind of wonky ellipse would actually extrude to the left along this ray. And minor and major axis always have a 90-degree angle. So this line is rotated. So that means to find the correct major axis, actually let's do it this way. So there is, for example, now my major axis. And it actually shows that something in my drawing is not necessarily really 100% correct. But the theory is that the upper half, so this part, can be rotated down to the other half, this part. And if you can do this, then your ellipse is actually correct. There's one other thing that actually throws off people a lot. You see that the major axis in perspective is actually not touching those points. Here in fake 2D, it lines up at the midpoints, but not in perspective. So one very easy way, for example, to construct a drawing at the beginning is by, for example, what some people do. They just, from a vanishing point, sketch out, let's say for a car, the lines, and then they will come with an ellipse and try to kind of like put down the correct orientation. And again, this one and this one should be the same. This is the major axis. Major axis is 90 degrees. And please keep in mind, the ellipse I put down here right now is, of course, a non-distorted perspective ellipse. So this is not really 100% correct. But that actually is nearly everything that is important to know about ellipses. Because they are so complicated, I really highly suggest and require that you practice drawing in those grids, working with the midpoints, working with the 1/3 points, and then drawing your ellipse in. It's also not good to, for example, start at one point, drawing an arc, going to the next point, drawing in an arc, because when you draw with a pen on paper, those arcs here are parallel or tangent to those directions. So you want to circle with your pen across the elliptical curve, and then if you feel like this hits, you just draw it really lightly with a pen, so light pressure. And then if you feel this is really good, then for example you can redraw and put down a little bit more pressure and make the ellipse pop out more. Because if the ellipse is wrong and you pressed a lot, you have an incorrectly drawn ellipse on the paper. And then at one point when you really are proficient at constructing ellipses, then again you draw your axes, minor, major, and project the correct degree of an ellipse onto it.